It began with a quiet panic, an empty store shelf, a missing video box, a late fee that somehow mattered more than the movie itself. In the 1990s, this tiny moment, repeated in millions of homes, shaped an empire, and in a twist no one expected, that same moment would later become the crack that split the ground beneath one of the biggest entertainment giants the world had ever seen. This is the story of how Blockbuster rose from a single store to a cultural monolith, only to crumble into dust as Netflix and the wider streaming revolution, later joined by Warner Brothers, and its vast content war, overtook the world it once confidently ruled. Blockbuster didn't start with grand ambition. In 1985, it opened quietly in Dallas, a bright store packed with more movies than anyone had seen in one place. At the time, renting tapes was still a bit of a gamble. Stores were small, selections were thin, and nobody had cracked the code for mass video rental success. But Blockbuster did. Its founder, David Cook, realized something simple. Families wanted convenience, variety, and a place that felt bigger and more reliable than the cramped neighborhood rental shop. Blockbuster grew with electric speed. By the early 1990s, its glowing blue and yellow sign was the universal symbol for weekend fun. As Blockbuster spread to thousands of locations, the company became more than a store, it was a ritual. Friday nights meant walking down brightly lit aisles, hunting for new releases, and racing to grab the last copy of a hit film. Kids tugged at parents. Teenagers debated over action or comedy. Adults wandered in rows of titles that held the promise of escape. It was a cultural heartbeat, one so loud and steady that it seemed impossible to imagine it ever going silent. But foreshadowing crept in early. Even at its peak, Blockbuster relied on late fees, painful, frustrating charges that customers hated but the company considered essential. These small irritations began to shape resentment. They were tiny sparks waiting for dry grass. Meanwhile, a new idea was slowly forming in Silicon Valley. Two men, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, believed the internet could reshape how people watched movies. They created Netflix in 1997, a tiny company offering DVDs by mail. No stores, no aisles, no late fees. Just a red envelope arriving like magic at your doorstep. At first, Netflix looked harmless, almost laughably small compared to Blockbuster's massive global presence. But the seeds of change rarely roar at the start. In 2000, Netflix approached Blockbuster with a partnership offer that has since become one of the most famous what-ifs in business history. Netflix wanted to run Blockbuster's online service, while Blockbuster promoted Netflix in stores. The price, $50 million. Blockbuster declined. Executives dismissed Netflix as a novelty, a flimsy side idea that posed no threat to their booming empire. This was the turning point, the moment when triumph began slowly twisting toward tragedy. Over the next few years, Netflix grew with steady, relentless momentum. It embraced a subscription model, turning movie rentals into a monthly service that felt effortless. Customers loved the convenience, the lack of late fees, and the thrill of discovering new movies through early recommendation algorithms. Netflix was planting a new kind of entertainment culture quietly, patiently, and with strategies Blockbuster didn't fully understand. Blockbuster finally reacted, launching its own online service. At first, it seemed like a fierce comeback. Blockbuster still had thousands of stores, tens of millions of loyal customers, and a brand embedded in everyday life. But inside the company, battles erupted. Leadership disagreements, shifting strategies, and internal tension weakened the response. Blockbuster was fighting a war without a unified plan, while Netflix advanced with laser focus. Then came the streaming revolution, an earthquake in slow motion. When Netflix introduced streaming in 2007, the world changed. Movies appeared instantly, shifting entertainment from physical shelves to invisible digital libraries. The idea felt futuristic, almost unreal. Blockbuster tried to adapt, but its massive store network became an anchor, while Netflix soared by eliminating the very concept of physical space. Blockbuster was chained to real estate, leases, inventory, and old habits. Ironically, the feature that once defined Blockbuster, its thousands of stores, became the weight that dragged it under. As Netflix surged, Hollywood began reorganizing itself. Studios that once relied on DVD sales saw the future forming online. Warner Bros., Disney, Universal, and others began licensing content to streaming platforms, fueling the fire even more. At first, they treated Netflix as a distributor, but soon, the old guard realized something chilling. Netflix was no longer just a library. It was becoming a competitor, building original content that threatened traditional movie studios. Yet Blockbuster never reached this phase. By the time streaming reshaped the entertainment world, Blockbuster was already deep in crisis. Debt soared, store closures multiplied. The company filed for bankruptcy in 2010. In less than 15 years, Blockbuster had gone from global dominance to irrelevance. While Blockbuster faded into memory, Netflix rose into a new era, one defined by content wars. Warner Bros., with its enormous library of films, series, and franchises, joined the battle. HBO Max, later restructured under Warner Brothers. Discovery entered the field with a treasure trove of iconic properties. The streaming war became a modern version of what Blockbuster once represented: massive competition, rapid expansion, enormous budgets, and fierce fights for attention. Ironically, Blockbuster had once stood exactly where Netflix and Warner Brothers now stood, at the peak of cultural influence, shaping how people consumed entertainment. What seemed unshakable became dust, and what began quietly a humble DVD by mail service and a studio entering streaming decades after its founding became the new titans. The aftermath of Blockbuster's collapse left behind a mix of nostalgia and lessons. People remembered the joy of choosing a movie in person, the thrill of discovering new titles through exploration rather than algorithms, and the simple social magic of a family trip to a video store. But they also recognized the tyranny of late fees, the inconvenience of physical returns, and the limits of a model built for a world before the internet. Blockbuster taught the business world to fear complacency. It showed that no brand is too big to fall, no system too strong to be outpaced, no empire too vast to crumble when technology shifts beneath it. Netflix, Warner Bros., and every other streaming giant now live under the shadow of this cautionary tale. They fight to stay relevant in a rapidly shifting ecosystem, one in which yesterday's leader can become tomorrow's relic. Streaming itself is now facing new challenges: consolidation, rising costs, subscriber fatigue, and creative risk all shape a landscape far less stable than it once seemed. The same forces that toppled Blockbuster innovation, adaptability, speed now threaten every player in the entertainment arena. No company, no matter how historic or powerful, is immune to disruption. What remains most striking about Blockbuster's rise and fall is not just the collapse, but how quickly it happened. One decade of unstoppable momentum, one decade of unstoppable decline, boom to dust, in the most literal sense. In the end, Blockbuster's story is not just about movies or technology. It is about human nature. We build things believing they will last forever. We cling to what feels comfortable, even when change is knocking on the door. We underestimate new ideas because they seem small, quiet, or strange. Blockbuster dismissed Netflix the same way many dismiss the next big shift, without realizing history is already turning behind them. Ambition can create empires, but humility, adaptability, and vision are what keep them alive. Blockbuster rose because it understood what people wanted in its time. It fell because it couldn't imagine a future beyond its own success. Netflix rose because it dared to reinvent the very idea of movie watching. Warner Brothers endures because it evolves across eras, reshaping itself through decades of cultural upheaval. The streaming wars show that nothing stays still, not industries, not companies, not audiences, and certainly not technology. The story of Blockbuster reminds us that every boom carries the seeds of its own dust, but within that dust lies the reminder that new ideas are always waiting to rise. Ambition can build towers, but resilience keeps them standing. And in a world constantly rewriting its own rules, the greatest strength is the courage to adapt before the ground gives way. That is the legacy Blockbuster leaves behind, an empire that once shaped our nights, now a symbol of how quickly the world can change, and how even the mightiest fall when they stop moving forward. It is a story of triumph, collapse, and the eternal truth that nothing, no matter how beloved, is guaranteed to last. And perhaps that is what makes every rise so powerful, every fall so humbling, and every new beginning so full of possibility.